everyone, thank you for bearing with us whilst we ironed out some technical issues. And thank you for coming along at the end of day 2. If you were reading my presenter notes, I'm going to thank you for that because we're all exhausted. I'm Jen, I'm a lead consultant developer at ThoughtWorks. And over the past 14 years, I've had various roles from developer, tech lead, architect, and so on. And I've worked in a whole bunch of domains. I've worked for the police, I've worked in oil and gas, I've worked in retail, and I've worked for clients all over the world. And today I'm going to share with you a story about what I think is a really super simple tool in the kind of socio-technical engineering space, a tool that we can use to untangle the big balls of mud that our software systems turn into. And particularly I'm going to highlight how the kind of non-technical and technical worlds come together and how they really do impact each other. So for anyone that's not familiar, business capability mapping is traditionally used to describe what an organization does. Not how it does it, or where it does it, or why, but the what of what it does. And quite often you'll see these ginormous maps and they'll have lots of different levels of capability, level 1, level 2, level 3. And we might rank those in terms of their importance. So is this a differentiator from our competitors? And we might rank them in terms of maturity. How confident are we in our ability to supply this capability to our users? They're a way for a business to really describe what they want to do, track their progress against that, and see how they're doing against their competitors. So you might see capability maps that look like this in a big spreadsheet where we're mapping overall maturity, target maturity. We might have people that are responsible for them. We might have some fancy colouring on to show heat maps of where there's problems. Or you might see something that looks a bit like this in Miro. This is from a ThoughtWorks piece on electric vehicle charging. You can see all the capabilities are these little hexagons. They're organised into groups, and then even bigger groups on top of that. ThoughtWorks loves a hexagon. We put them everywhere. A couple of years ago, a primarily back-end dev, tried to use vanilla JavaScript to write something to render hexagons like this. It's really hard if you don't know what you're doing. Do not recommend. Now, did anybody go to Rob Horn's talk yesterday on legacy displacement? Yeah, so he mentioned a little bit about another place we might use capabilities, and that's when we're starting a project. Maybe it's a legacy migration project, and we want to know what we need to build. So we get our capabilities, and then we can design each of those capabilities and have them nice and isolated and decoupled. But what if you find yourself in the middle of a delivery project, and you've already got a roadmap, you've already got milestones, you've already got deadlines, and you don't have any overarching capabilities, and you don't really know where you're going? What do you do? How do you get out of that mess? So that's the story I'm going to tell today, is how we managed to do that in the middle of delivery. So the project that I was working on, we were building a new platform to replace a legacy estate. We weren't looking for feature parity, but we wanted to have the same broad capabilities and selling points. And we wanted to build it in a more efficient, more scalable and evolvable way. That was the high-level goal. This project had already been going on for about a year. They had, as I say, they had a roadmap, they had deadlines, they had teams working on stuff. And I was part of a new team that was spun up, and we were trying to find our way in the world. If you don't have capabilities to begin with, how do your teams know what to work on? Well, they have to find that themselves. So we were talking to stakeholders, we were talking to management, we were talking to other delivery teams, trying to figure out what we should do and where we should be. And whilst we were doing that, we realized that we were in the middle of a big ball of mud. And we realized in a way that the teams that were laser focused on their work couldn't see because they were too fenced in. But it became really obvious to us. And just to give you an idea of the scale, I'm not talking about a big ball of mud as in one service where maybe some of your classes are too tightly coupled to one another. We're talking about 10 plus delivery teams, 60 developers. They'd built by this point about 30 microservices or not so microservices. And in the end, we ended up with something like 40-odd capabilities. So that's the scale of the ball of mud I'm talking about here. So I'm going to run through 5 of the red flags that indicated to us that what we were building was turning into a big ball of mud. So red flag number 1 was that we had quite a technology-first, architecture-first approach. We had some nice diagrams that were reasonably up to date. But the thing that kind of spiked our interest was that we were hearing about teams being spun up to build a particular service in the architecture. We need somebody to build this service. We need somebody to build this component. And when we asked those teams, how do you know you need to build that service in the first place? What is it? What's the value of it? They weren't able to tell us. They didn't know. They'd either say, oh, well, we need a component to read this Kafka topic and filter the messages and pass it on down the pipeline, something really technical. Or worse, they'd say, well, in the legacy system, we've got a service that does this, so we should build one too. No, please don't. So that put it on the list for us, right? Red flag. And we also realized that what was happening is we all love team topologies, right? That's great. It's a great way to organize our teams. When you're in the middle of delivery and you've got really tight timescales, you don't do team topologies, you do who's got bandwidth. So we had loads of teams being asked to build services and components because we thought they might have the time to do it. Not in any way related to the rest of the domain they were working on or the area they knew about, just because they kind of had time. Maybe they were really great and they finished stuff fast. Also, not a good sign, also resulting in this architecture where we had teams everywhere, pieces deployed all over the place. Red flag number 2, duplication. We would talk to one team about what they were doing, we'd talk to another team about what they were doing, and it turns out they were doing the same thing. And they had no idea that they were both doing it. So, for example, it became really apparent that authentication for some of the new tools in the platform was something that a couple of different teams thought they should both be doing. Plus, there was another team outside of our program that was having a more holistic view at it. So if we'd let that keep going, we could have ended up with 2 or 3 different competing implementations of authentication that would have resulted in an overly complex architecture. Plus, we would have lost so much time of research and development from each of those teams redoing the same thing. Thankfully, we didn't see too much of that, but enough to make it onto this list. Red flag number 3 were fragmented capabilities, and we saw a lot more of this. So that's where you have one business capability that is split across teams. Those capabilities are usually better looked after by one team because there's a more cohesive development experience, a more cohesive experience for users. And when you have them spread across teams, that means any change to that capability means you need cross-team collaboration, which is slow. You need cross-team testing, which is slow and complicated. And you've got all kinds of discussions, arguments about who owns what, who's responsible for the data, and so on. So we were seeing this quite frequently, that we would have what we considered one business capability shared across teams. If we're going to do that, we really want to do it in a measured way where we've thought about it and we understand the risks involved, not this kind of unintentional fragmentation we had. The 4th red flag was missing capabilities. We would talk to folks that had built the legacy system. We would talk to our stakeholders, and we would realize that there were capabilities that were expected, needed, that none of our teams in the new world, as we were calling it, were even talking about them. We weren't looking for feature parity, like I said, but there's definitely the crux of the business, right? You need to bring that with you, and there was core things we were missing. So, for example, external access to some of the tools, so for our clients to access. Nobody was talking about it, but it's kind of the main point for opening up your revenue streams, right? Is to get your clients to use it. Worst case scenarios, we're not going to build what we think we're building. We're not going to meet our stakeholder needs. We might also build ourselves into an architecture where it makes it really hard to retrofit that later, right? Depending on what the capability is. So that was a red flag. And the final one was we realised that there was confusion in what DDD would call the ubiquitous language. We have lots of different teams with their own subdomains, so they have their own definitions, their own terminology, and that's grand. But for terms and concepts that spanned the whole program, we still had lots of different words for the same thing, lots of different phrases. We had client configuration, customer configuration, user configuration, preferences, settings, and more, all for pretty much the same capabilities. And that made it even more difficult to understand who was responsible for what and what was being built where, because something that seemed like it might be two different capabilities could actually be the same thing, just under a different name. So it was really hard to draw those boundaries. And all of these red flags together made it really hard to reason about our technical decision making. How do we know that we're building the new platform in an extensible, scalable way if we don't really know what it is we're building or what it is that we're trying to scale or extend? So based on what we'd seen there, we thought it would be a good idea to try and fix these problems. We weren't naive enough to think that we could just, untangle it overnight, but we thought we could do something to present what we'd seen in an easy to understand way and start facilitating those conversations to fix the mess, basically. We had some constraints though, so I mentioned our teams were in full delivery mode. They had deadlines, they had stakeholder expectations to meet. We were also a team of 2 people, so that was a bit of a constraint. And we also didn't want to take too long, because the longer that we left this, the worse it would become, right? The more complex our architecture would get by accident, the more competing implementations of things we would have, just the worse it would become. So I mentioned we were a team of 2. There's myself, a tech lead, and Ellie. She's a BA, a business analyst, and that was really lucky, actually, because it turns out that the skills that you need are somebody that can talk about and understand business value, business capabilities. That was Ellie. And somebody who could dissect technical documentation and maybe pull out those capabilities that teams were building but they weren't articulating. Because if teams aren't used to thinking about capabilities, they're not going to talk about them. But they might still be building them anyway and they just don't realize. So in our pair, to minimize the disruption to the teams, we did research into every single one of our delivery teams, just the 2 of us, plus a bunch of teams on the legacy side. We read through all of, I think one of the sessions earlier called it Technomatter, so confluence pages, user guides, ADRs, architecture diagrams, we read through it all, and we extracted what we thought were the business capabilities for each team from there. We did all that legwork ourselves. But that was just our view on it, our understanding. So then was the first point where we needed input from the teams, and we prepped so well that all we needed was a 1-hour session with each team to get them to validate what we'd done. So we presented what we'd done, we had a set of questions that we were asking them, and we got them to reflect on that and say, yep, you're right, or no, you're wrong, or actually we call it something else, and we updated it. Updated our kind of research as we went. And by the end of those sessions, we had the second draft of our big picture view of what we were actually trying to build and what we were actually building, which somehow we had lost along the way in our delivery. And it was at that point that we wanted to actually build a capability map and start using it to untangle the mess. And what I think was the key value behind this is that we built something that was really visual, with deliberate visual cues to highlight all of those red flags that I mentioned earlier, something that both technical folks and our business stakeholders could understand and immediately see where the issues lay. So, how do we build it? First thing we did is we drew out our capabilities on a virtual whiteboard, as you do. I mentioned before that we weren't doing this a traditional way. We didn't have multi-layers. We went with a kind of Goldilocks approach to our capabilities, just the right amount of information to convey what we were building, what our stakeholders were expecting, without being so vague as to be meaningless and so detailed as to be overwhelming. So we just had the 1 layer. We organised them in what we called flows, so it was kind of like a user journey or a user flow. And under each capability, we broke it down into a couple of steps in the flow. So for example, we had a capability around external data management and curation, and the steps under it were deciding on data to fetch, fetching data, and making the data available to the rest of the platform. And the only reasons for that was to make it easier for our delivery teams and our stakeholders to understand the map. We hadn't done business capability mapping before. They hadn't seen this, they didn't know. So we wanted to give them as many cues as we could so that they could understand what they were looking at. And we added a few more bits of information, again, just for that. So red flag number 5, if you remember, was terminology, ubiquitous language. People had different names for things. So where we'd chosen a specific name for a capability, that might not be the name that all the teams used. So we wanted to add even more info so that they knew what it was. Maybe you knew it as user personalization, but we'd chosen user configuration. But with all of this kind of metadata, you could understand that. So we organized our capabilities into capability groups, just to make it easier to navigate the map. Everything under here is to do with user authentication, everything under there is to do with reporting and auditing. And we added in some example features. So it wasn't all the features, because that would have just been impossible, but we added in example features again, so that somebody could look at that capability and say, I don't really know what that is, and then read the example features and say, oh, actually, that makes sense now, I've got it. The other reason that we did this is that we knew that there were some capabilities with key features that had been missing for our discussions, so we wanted to highlight that later on. So that was another reason we added those in. So we had our capability map. Continuing with the theme of minimizing disruption to our delivery teams, instead of having a wonderful in-person workshop where we got everybody across Europe together in a room for a week, we had 1 2-hour Zoom meeting. That's all we had to start with. And we got tech leads and BAs and our stakeholders from the program and stakeholders from technology together. And the very first thing that we did was we sent them off into breakout rooms in their teams to just look at the map. Just look at the map, read the capabilities, read the features, and put down any questions that they had on any of it. I don't know what this means, I don't know what that means. Shouldn't this be somewhere else? Just put your questions down. And then we got them all back together, and we went through each of those questions. And right there and then, we changed the map. We would move things around, we were dragging things up and down, we'd add things in, we would change the wording. Because the point of that first section was to get that alignment between everybody, that they knew what we were talking about, they knew what the overall goal was. It wasn't a time for Ellie and I to be precious about the well-crafted business capability names that we'd come up with that we spent ages poring over. It was much more important to use the terms that the teams actually resonated with. So that was the first half of the workshop. The second half, we got the teams to do 2 things. Firstly, we asked them to put a little color-coded box with their team name under the capability that they thought they were a core contributor for. That's all we said. We just said, do you think you're a core contributor for this? Do you think that you're building the main logic behind this capability? And we asked them to do the same for capabilities that they thought they might be supporting for, or enabling. Maybe you're not doing the core logic, but maybe you're enabling it in some way. For example, we had some machine learning models, and we ended up with one team that was responsible for curating the inputs to those models and choosing which model to run. We had another team that was responsible for storing them and then running them efficiently. That was 2 separate teams. So we sent them off into their breakout rooms again. We got them back, and we did the grand unveiling. And that was it was like magic. You could see immediately where our problems were. Little color-coded boxes with the teams showed us straight away where there were capabilities, where we had a team, or we had teams that they thought they were responsible for the same thing. So that's either duplication of effort, or it's fragmented capabilities. That's what that means. And you can just see it straight away. You don't need technical knowledge, you don't need business knowledge. You can see how come there's 2 teams that think they're doing that capability. We could also see, and this wasn't one of our red flags, but we could see that there was at least one team that thought they had a lot more to do than everybody else. So not a red flag for what we were looking at, but definitely a red flag for them. Too much on their plate. So that was really an interesting side effect to this. We could also see one of the other red flags I mentioned, red capabilities with nobody responsible for them. So there's just no team there, no colour. It was blindingly obvious. In at least a couple of cases, we had people that thought they were enablers for it, but nobody thought they were doing the core work. So I don't know what the enablers thought they were enabling, but it wasn't the capability. And then something that happened that we weren't expecting was that we got a couple of new capabilities in too. Teams had added them in. So that had us thinking, well, these ones without a team under them, are they actually important? Do we need them? And these ones that have been added in, how come nobody's mentioned them before? Are they actually important? Because surely they would have come up in discussions. If they're not, why are we working on them? Lots of questions. So within a couple of hours, we had better team alignment, and we had this way to visualize our problems and track our problems using the map. Got a little snippet here. This is a work in progress of what ours look like. You see we did not do hexagons. And you can see here on the right-hand side, we've got two teams that think they're doing the same stage in a capability, and the same two teams think they're doing a capability over there. So that's where it was obvious to us. So the next thing was basically just to get people to talk to each other. Those teams that thought they were sharing a capability, pop them in a room for an hour, let's chat about it. We tried to get them to either give that capability to one team or the other, so they had sole responsibility, or maybe it was too big a capability and we needed to split it in two. Either way, please go away, talk about it, and make this decision. For those ones where we had capabilities with no teams assigned to them, we chatted to our stakeholders and we said, is this really important? Is it really a high-value capability? Do we need to have it? Can we ditch it from the roadmap, or do we need to create a new team? So we had those conversations. And as that was going on, we were empowering everyone to update the map as they went. As soon as you have a conversation, you've made a decision, you update the map because you own that particular area. And then we came back and we had another 2-hour workshop. So all in all, our delivery teams had probably contributed 1 day's worth of work to this. And this is kind of what happened. So we had our fuzzy boundaries were cleared up. We had tasks in teams' backlogs to do any technical detangling they might need to do if they were handing something over. We created a new team that I then became part of to do some of the work that hadn't had a team before. And we also took on some of the work from that team I mentioned that had too much to do. And we'd ditched some capabilities as well, right? Things that we don't need to think about yet, they're not actually important. Let's not bother thinking about them. So by this point, the map had become this kind of living artifact that we could refer to, and we could update it, and we could keep iterating on it. But I think one of the important things that we'd come to was getting the teams to have those super important discussions with one another, to actually communicate with one another. Because perhaps if we were having those conversations, then we might not spiral again, because I'm not going to build something because I've spoken to you and I know that you're actually already building that. Let's keep that conversation going. So since the initial sessions, the map's kind of grown. It's been used as input to workshops and brainstorming sessions. It spawned new visualizations of similar themes to help the teams understand their value streams. It takes some effort to maintain it and keep it up to date, and we're probably not as good at that as we should be. But when you empower all of the teams to own their own little section, it makes it really easy for them to add. I can add a new capability when my team gets that, or I can add a new team in when they join the program. And I think definitely the benefits that we saw outweighed that little bit of effort from each team to keep it updated. So I'm super keen to try this approach again on another large-scale project, especially one that's in flight, it's happening, people feel lost, they feel like they don't know how to untangle themselves because they're too busy with their day jobs. I'd really like to try this again and see how it works. And I would love to hear from anyone that's done anything similar or tries it. Please reach out on LinkedIn and let me know that you've done it. And I'll be around tomorrow as well if anybody has any questions or you want to chat about it. Thank you.